Welcome to Lee Domingue's podcast, where he shares stories and teaches principles behind why and how your legacy starts today.
Well, hey, everyone, and welcome to the Legacy Starts Today podcast, where we're passionate about living life on purpose and leaving a legacy that starts today. I'm so excited today. I've got a good friend of mine all the way from the great state of Virginia. Some people say Virginia is for lovers. I don't know what that means, but he's a fantastic guy, a great leader. You're in for a treat today. Kyle Kramer is one diversified. He is one of my heroes in the ability to multitask. He's been able to not only be successful in the business sector and in the military sector, but also is one of the key leaders at Lifepoint Church in Virginia, where they have multiple campuses. Kyle is a chief of staff there with serving Pastor Daniel and Tammy Floyd in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He also serves, I'll have to read some of this, he also serves as the executive director of Lifepoint College, and he's also the director of Lifepoint's Kingdom Builder team, and that's serving business leaders, those that aren't in full-time ministry, with the gift of generosity. So he covers a large gamut. But before he was on staff at Lifepoint, Kyle had quite a background in both military and business. And I think it's important. He's probably cringing that I'm going to share some of this, because he's also one of the most humble guys I've ever met in my life. And he's just fresh air in any room. And so, but he received undergraduate degree in history with minors in English and political science from VMI. Come on, Virginia Military Institute. He has an advanced degree in joint military operations and national security strategy from the George Washington University. He's earned his doctorate, his PhD in organizational leadership from Southeastern University. No longer calling him Mr. Kramer, he's Dr. Kramer. Kyle has an extensive background in combat leadership as a naval officer of more than 20 years, including 6 combat tours to the Middle East and a Bronze Star Medal for actions while serving on a Joint Special Operations Task Force. He was the Vice President of Defense for Mobius Consulting until 2018, and now serves as a senior advisor to the CEO and president. Man, that's an amazing pedigree. What a journey. Can't wait for you to share with our group today, Kyle. So welcome, Kyle. Thank you, too, for your service to our country. That is not something that I'm saying lightly. It's an amazing commitment, how you've given your life to serve others, brother. You were just exemplary, not in your just in serving, but the way you lead your family and your marriage, and also how you lead in church. And so it's an honor to have you with us. Excited for our viewers to get to meet Dr. Kyle Kramer.
I'm excited to meet him too. That intro is great. Thank you.
Well, we've got a great day for you. And so, you know, a lot of times on our Legacy podcast, you know, it relates to God, family, mission. And I talk to pastors and leaders all over the world, and I think it's a common thread. And I think the thread really is we're all looking for purpose. People are longing for fulfillment. Yep. And I think as a believer, our lens then changed to not only making an impact, but making an eternal impact. You know, I use the phrase e-ROI, eternal return on investment, and I think it really is the way that we calculate impact as believers. It's what's going to show up in heaven, because we're going to live such a brief life here on earth, but we want to make one that's going to be impactful. You had a very unique position that you served in the military, you served in the business world, now you're serving in ministry. Why don't you tell us a little bit about and unpack that journey to ministry? And one, I've got to ask the question, how and why did you even take that leap?
Yeah, I would be lying if I said that I knew I was going to go into ministry one day. My dad was bivocational. He was our senior pastor, but he also ran his own investment advisement company. And I had no desire to go into ministry. I knew from very early on that I wanted to serve in the military, probably go into business one day, maybe even politics. And that's kind of the route that I chose. So when I graduated, you have to remember this is pre-September 11th, right? May 2001 is when I graduated. Well, my graduating class happened to be the most deployed class of any in history. Oh, wow. Think about, May 2001, September 11th happens, and everybody from my class were gone for years on end. And so that's where I found myself. I had a unique journey through the Navy. Most people that of my contemporaries, when I tell them about my story, most of them are like, I've never even heard of that before. So I found myself multiple combat deployments in. I'm at a Joint Special Operations Task Force, and if I'm completely open and authentic about it, I loved the work. Like, I enjoyed it. I was really good at it, but it was taking a huge toll on my family. And I remember it vividly. I was on a call with my wife. We had just gotten done with an operation, and she said, would you consider, taking a step back, or even maybe leaving the military, changing jobs or leaving the military? And I remember thinking to myself, if I really truly am dedicated to this marriage, we have to do it together. It's not about Kyle anymore. And we made the decision to transition after almost 11 years on active duty to going into a world that I really didn't understand, the corporate world, because I was trained to fight for a long time, and we did. Like, we were gone. By the time my son was 3 years old, I think I'd been around for 3 months of his life. Wow. That's a lot of time to spend away from home. I spent the majority of my adulthood training for going off to or coming back from war, and now I find myself trying to figure out what to do with some of these skill sets that don't necessarily translate across. Well, I found myself going into the corporate world and working in defense contracting. It made sense to me at the time. Like, okay, I can turn some of this into maybe a job. And that was about the same time that we encountered Lifepoint, moved back to Virginia. So that would have been the 2011 timeframe. And the second we walked in the doors at Lifepoint, we knew we were home. Like, I'd spent a couple of weeks, actually it's probably a couple of months, looking at different churches. The family would stay at home, watch our old church online while I was going around visiting different churches. We were trying to find a place to plant ourselves. And I remember one Sunday, my wife's like, hey, the whole family's going. And my kids were young then. She said, the whole family's going, we're all going in. And I found this church online, and I want to give it a shot. So we rolled up. Lifepoint was still at Riverbend High School. And the second we walked in, I was like, we're home, babe. This is where we're going to stay. So we went all in. And I think this is an important part for people to understand. When I say we went all in, we were serving, we were in small group, but we were also tithing. Like, we moved our tithe over from our previous church. I think there's something about that the heart connects with the house in a unique way. And then we started giving over and above. And I'm going to get back to my path to ministry, but I think it's important here to highlight this story. I remember that same Easter, I think it was, Pastor Daniel was talking about sacrificial giving. And my wife and I, we both grew up in the church, but we never really been taught what that was like. And I remember distinctly going, hey, babe, I really feel like we're supposed to stretch ourselves. Like, this needs to hurt. Like, we need to set a number we know we can't hit. And we prayed about it, and we settled on a number. And the second we made that decision, I mean, it must have been within 24 hours, a job opportunity or a business opportunity opened up that more than made up for the gap. Wow. Yeah. But I remember thinking, Amy and I were talking about this. We said, we really feel like he's calling us to sacrifice. So we increased it again. We basically doubled it again. Within 6 months of that, I was promoted to vice president and doubled the gap that we had at that point. Wow. So it's good. Those moments, those faith building moments, that for us, that's what I mean when I say we were all in. We were believing for God to do great things. And that's really important for my path to ministry, because it was those moments that later on I can look back on and say, those were pivotal for me to be able to trust God in the decision I made to leave the corporate world. I mean, I was building a company, defense contracting firm. We started out with nothing, and we were handling multi-million-dollar contracts by the time I left. And I remember distinctly, Pastor Daniel did not come and ask me to come work for the church. He said, I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to ask you to pray about what's next for you. I just feel like there's something unsettling right now, and I think you just need to pray. So my wife and I are like, sure. I mean, I loved what I was doing. I hired almost everybody at that company. I was really good at it. I was making a lot of money at it. And I was like, yeah, I'll go pray about it. But I knew there was, I wasn't going to leave the company. And we went and prayed for a few days together. We went off to a lake house. And I was sure going into the prayer, I was just going to come back and say, thank you. I love you. I'll continue to, at the time I was a dream teamer and I was building the college, helped build the college from scratch as a dream teamer, as a volunteer. So I was going to come back and say, hey, I'll do this for you for free. You can't afford me anyway. And then at the end of that 4 days at the lake, we knew we were supposed to transition into ministry.
Wow.
But it was because of moments like where we really believed God to make up those differences, and other key moments, like when I transitioned off of active duty, that we were confident that God was going to just breathe on and bless whatever it is we did next. So that's what I did. I said yes. I didn't even know what I was saying yes to. That's part of the story the pastor never tells people. It was like when he asked me to come on, he didn't tell me what it was for. He didn't give me a salary. He just said, I want you to come over. And I said yes to it. And the first job he gave me was overseeing the college, which I was already doing as a dream teamer. But then he asked me to oversee campus pastors. And I didn't know anything about being a campus pastor, but I did know this. I knew that one, God was in it. And two, I had spent, a decade and a half, more than that, developing leaders. And so that's kind of what I relied on, is like, I sat down with him, clearly got some guidance, but I knew I could at least start there.
That skill set really carried over. Now I'm gonna back up 1 second, because you're gonna have to answer this.
Okay.
When Amy, because your wife is an incredible leader. Like
she is.
I think I met her first. Matter of fact, I did. When I came to Lifepoint, I met her first before I believe I met you. Or my team had interacted with her, and she's got a spirit of excellence. She is just on it. So super high capacity leader. So your wife calls you when you're deployed, and she wants you to rethink the whole career that you've spent, viewers, you've heard the resume, all of these years preparing for this moment to be in the military, in what you're doing. You've prepped for it a vast portion of your life. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, for her to suggest that an audible be called that, hey, would you maybe even consider getting out of the military completely? What was the first couple of things? You got to tell me what was going through your mind at that moment.
That's a fair question. And I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that before. It was kind of a gut punch, but not in the way that you would expect. It was a gut punch because it was more like a reality check. I made a decision early on when Amy and I got married. Like, she and I grew up together, so I've known her for 36, 37 years. So we know each other really well. But when she asked me that question, I could tell this wasn't like, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. It was more like, hey, this is taking more of a toll than I think you understand. And it was kind of like a reality check for me, going, am I going to make our relationship about me, or is it about us? Because up to that point, and I don't want to make it sound like, I didn't take into account what she thought, and, we had a good relationship, but really my career was about me. Yeah. And so I had a decision to make. Is it about me, or is it about us, the family? And I had 2 kids at that point. I think I had 2 kids now at that point, and we had to make some good decisions for the longevity of marriage. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted to stay married to her.
How long have y'all been married?
20 years this year.
Wow. Yeah, no, just incredible. She's an incredible leader. So you go through this stage, you're making this transition. I kind of had one of those with Pastor Chris. I don't tell publicly a lot of people, but there were 5 churches that asked me to come on their team after it sold their company, took a couple of years off trying to find out what's next. And so was very planted at my church in Louisiana, had no plans on leaving, going anywhere. But those 5 churches started spurring something in me that are we supposed to move? I've just been in business my whole life. So I'd never done, I was just a business guy in a church that loved to fund things and to be a part of generosity. And I'll never forget, I spoke at Highlands, and Pastor Chris, he didn't offer me anything. He didn't even say, come here. I was just like, I said, man, I think we may be moving. And he was just like, well, you just keep praying. God will show you. Keep praying. And in my mind, I'm thinking, man, I could help this guy. And sure enough, but that's exactly what I needed to hear you just go pray. And what he was doing after the fact is he knew God was messing with me in a way that was like, there's something different, something else. There's something more. But what he did, though, is he wanted me to make sure that I was called by God to do it. And it wasn't just like winging it on some kind of, this could be maybe a good idea. Because you really have to, this is the one thing I've found in ministry that's even different than business, is business, sometimes I can turn it off. Ministry, it's hard to, because you're dealing with people. It's 24/7. I mean, one room you walk into, it's a death, a funeral. Next one, it's a wedding. Then it's a childbirth. Then it's a business sale. Then it's a child who's a parent dealing with a child that they're having struggles with. It's a marriage dynamic. There's all these different things that happen. And whereas in ministry, you better be called to it. And
absolutely.
And you almost, I'll never forget what Pastor told me one time. He said, Lee, he goes, you're going to have to remember, like, you remember where you were when God called you? I said, yeah, I was in the Marriott Hotel on Highway 280. He said, that's good. You're going to have to remember that, because you're going to have to bring yourself back to that place and remind yourself God called you from time to time. When you get a moment that doesn't go well, when you get a moment that, man, you just kind of like, I don't know if I want this ministry thing, because church is different, But what happens is the principles that we've learned in business can definitely translate. There's a great illustration of your military background in building and leading teams correlated to your ability to be able to lead teams, build teams within the college, even in a volunteer dream team role, which I know every pastor listening right now wish they had somebody who was a volunteer dream team role that could start a college from scratch. I
ran the college for 5 years for free. So, but it was like you said, it was because I knew God had called me to do that. To me, it wasn't a burden. To me, I didn't think about it like, oh my gosh. Now, I had the benefit of being able to control my own time.
Yep.
And my time started increasing at the college, but I knew I was called. And it's absolutely right, because this is, I think, the thing that I maybe did not anticipate before coming over is the human toll. So somebody asked me a couple of years after I transitioned out of the business world. In fact, a lot of people, they knew I was heavily involved in the church, but they're like, "You're doing what? But you build missiles. Like, how are you doing?" But they asked me, I said, "What was the biggest takeaway for you? Like, what's the best thing about the transition?" And I said, "The best thing and the worst thing are the exact same thing. It's the people, because you get to see the dizzying highs and the really extreme low moments of people, but it's the most rewarding thing overall is the people." And I think that's the way that Jesus looked at it too. Like, he went through all that he went through because of the people.
That's great. So good. So good. Well, in your role under Pastor Daniel and Tammy, how's your experience? Let's talk a little bit about, we did touch a little bit on building teams, but how have you seen, especially in light of the last couple of years, I think every executive pastor probably should go through military training just on having to deal with crisis and just different things like that. But how has your experience prepared you for what you're doing now as chief of staff, running Kingdom Builders, the team there, as well as director at the college?
I do think it starts with building a good team. One of the things that I think, part of my PhD dissertation is about how you bring principles from business, military into the church world, because I think there's this misnomer that, pastoring and leading are separate things and that they don't coincide together. And I would argue sometimes we make excuses about poor leadership or the lack of leadership under this guise of I'm pastoring instead. Well, no, the two things can and have to coincide together. So what I recognized was early on, there's principle, like you can go through seminary and not learn some of these principles. If you look at Barna, Lifeway, any of those statistics right now, the number one reason that pastors are leaving, and they're leaving in record numbers, and it's not just pastors who are paid, it's ministry leaders, is they feel ill-prepared for the leadership challenges that they're going to experience. And COVID only made it worse, but that was already going on.
Yeah.
Like those are challenges that we've got to resolve. So we decided that the best way to build a strong foundation so that things like COVID in the future don't knock us off is to build a strong foundation inside people, not just in the relationship with Jesus, but that's first. And then give them the tools so they feel confident in those roles. Because you guys probably have seen it too, is the resiliency of some of our leaders in ministry when things started going wrong and chaos started happening. Boy, they were, hey, if I could do something else, I was going. But we're essential personnel. The church is the hospital. Like that's the one place that should not close down. If hospitals are staying open, churches need to stay open. Yeah. Regardless of what your politics are, that is an emergency room for people, the sick and dying, just the same way that a hospital is. And we need people that have courage. We need people that have resiliency that are going to stand the gap and say, no, we're not going to shy away from this. I remember we had a person, I won't go into details who, but we had an individual was asking about, I don't understand why the church, doesn't do this and doesn't do that. And I said, what did you think you were signing up for in ministry? Like when you said, I'm committing my life to ministry, what did you think you were signing up for? There's so many people, like you look back, we don't talk about these stories anymore, but there are people that, died in foreign lands for the gospel to be spread. And we get a disease that, sure, it's deadly and it's dangerous, but we're an emergency room. Like, who else is going to go do the gospel? We don't just run away because it gets hard. That's when we do our best work. Yeah. That's when Jesus did his best work. That's so good. I think some of those components, the resiliency, I think adaptability was a good one. Building a strong foundation of solid leaders, all of those really helped to build kind of the culture that we wanted. But more than anything else was the facing the faith built in our people, those God moments when you're really, it was not good at some points, but watching God move has a tremendous effect on building people's faith and growing their vision toward, advancing towards a mission. If anything, I could say in the military, one of the best things they do is their commitment to mission. They don't make it about people. They don't make it about results, although both of those are important and they're good. They make it about the mission. Because when it becomes about people, you make dumb decisions sometimes at the expense of. When you make it about the results, you can forget about people. But if you make it about the mission, it takes care of both of those things.
That's gold right there. You guys, don't miss that, what he just said. That's worth listening to another time and passing that along to your team. It's about the mission, not as much the results or just people. And that's really powerful. One of the things that you said, I want to back up 1 second, because something I thought of is in the military, you're trained to have a certain mental toughness. You have to. Yeah. There's got to be, and I've not been in the military, so I'm going to lean to you to unpack this, is what I'm hearing you saying when that person comes, like, what did you sign up for? Did you not understand? And I think that some people have grown faint-hearted because they didn't have either the props. So that's, as leaders, that's on us. We didn't properly train them. If you were going out and you were doing certain military operations, and you did not have all the training and the preparation, you'd probably crater. Mm-hmm. But because of the training, because of both mental, physical, emotional, just the whole dynamic, because I would think it's training the entire individual, not just an aspect of lifting weights and physical strength. There's got to be a mental toughness. There's got to be all these different things. And so there's something in that, what you just tapped into, that I think every leader, every pastor needs to incorporate in their church, to their teams, is we develop a physical and mental and emotional toughness to stay on point and finish the mission.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned, I was a track and field athlete in college, and if you talk to any real runner about, long distance, middle distance runner, about what it takes to be a great long distance athlete, it's not the physical capacity. So while that is true, it's not your skills, although that is good and you need those, it is mostly mental. You can push past pain with the right amount of mental toughness, but it also means you have to build that endurance over time. You have to put yourself in those positions that's just a little beyond your capability, because that needle then moves to that mark.
That's good.
So once you know you can, and that's what the military does each and every time. We have lots of really great communities that are building this mental toughness in their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And what they're doing is trying to move that mark for next time. The person knows that they can make it up to that point. You push it a little bit past that, well, the needle has now moved again. The same thing is true in ministry. The problem with it is most of us made it about a career and not a calling. So we looked at it and said, I'm going to do this job called ministry. I'm going to be a worship leader. I'm going to be an executive pastor, youth pastor, whatever it happens to be, forgetting the fact that it is a calling first, foremost, and only. Which is why if you are not called to it, you should go do something else, because it is going to be hard. Yeah. You're going to do the right things, and people are still going to come at you. You're going to get harassed even by people that are close to you. The Bible talks about how you're going to have your even friends and family come against you. That's true. It's going to be the case. It happened to Jesus. It happened to his disciples. And it's still true to this day. Yeah. So when, somebody comes to me and says, hey, I don't understand why, we have to come into work today because we've got, there's a global pandemic. Yeah. But there's still people that are lost. Yeah. If not us, then who?
That's right. That's so good. One of the, a mentor in my life for years, and he's dealing with some health challenges now, but he was a football coach at the University of Colorado, won a national championship. And I remember a scripture that he shared with me, and and I think every leader of people needs to encourage and lead them, and it's on us to adequately prepare our teams for mission. And that team could be our kids, our family, our employees, our staff, whatever it is. But there's a verse in Deuteronomy 20, verse 2 and 3 that says this, and this I'm reading from the Amplified. It says, and when you come near to the battle, the priest shall approach and speak to the men, and he shall say to them, hear, O Israel, you draw near this day to battle against your enemies. And those enemies could be physical, spiritual, your enemies. Well, watch this. Let not your minds and hearts faint. Fear not, and do not tremble or be terrified or in dread because of them. For the Lord your God, he goes with you to fight for you against the enemies to save you. And the officers shall speak to the people, saying, what man is there who has built a new house and is not dedicated? Let him go to his house, lest he die and another man dedicate it. And what man has planted a vineyard and he's not used the fruit of it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in battle and another man use the fruit of it. Then he goes to verse 8. And the officers shall speak further to the people. And this is so powerful. What man is fear? He's speaking to his team that's about to go in battle. What man is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him return to his house, lest because of him, his brothers' minds and hearts faint as does his own. Yep. I think what happens is, I think the key element and the key enemy is a spirit of fear that's running rampant.
Yeah.
And fear paralyzes people, but fear also infects other people around us. And so I think as someone who, as teams, we need to be decisive leaders. We need to speak with a decisiveness, and it's a decisiveness based on the Word of God. So my response is not my own response. I've been bought with a price. My response is what the Word of God says. And there's a confidence and a faith and a boldness, I think, then come on us as leaders. And then when we're leading, we're not leading from a place of a faint-heartedness that actually infects our team. We're leading it from a place of victory, because our confidence is not in our own abilities. Our confidence is in the Lord. When David approached Goliath, he didn't come in his own name. He says, Goliath, you've got this, you're intimidating in every way. But he says, no. I'm not coming in my own strength. I'm coming in the name of the Lord. And I think
that's
as
the
believers,
key component to it right there.
What's that?
I said that's the key component to it right there. One of your viewers can fact check me, but I think it's at least 114 times in the Bible where the Bible calls us to take heart or to have courage. In every single one of those instances, it's saying you can take heart or you can have courage because God goes before you or is with you. Every single one of those situations. So think about like Nehemiah, where it talks about building the wall with one hand and carrying a sword with the other. And they talk about how the wide was spread out across the wall. And there was a trumpet player who, when the trumpet sounded, they would all come together. But it did not say that they would then go fight the enemy. It said they would come together and the Lord would go fight for them.
Wow. Wow.
That's why you can have courage. That's why we should have courage. This is why I started by talking about how big and how important faith moments are, because courage, courage, like anything, it's like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it will atrophy. Same thing with faith. If you don't exercise it, it's going to atrophy. And do you really have faith? Do you really have trust in God? If you're saying, well, I'm going to let somebody else do that work, but I'm staying home today because I am, like you said, fearful. Or do you really want to trust God? Now, I'm not saying, don't hear me say, go out and be dumb and lick doorknobs and stuff like that. But there is this, idea of, no, if God's called me to do this, then I can have faith. I can have courage because I know he's going before it.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, I know that you guys have put together an amazing Kingdom Builder team. I remember I was there when they launched the team, and had the honor to be there. And I'll never forget that room. It was roughly about 200 and something people in it, and almost every single person in the room opted in to be a kingdom builder. And it was such a difference at that point, it was the highest percentage of, and I think that's a testimony of Pastor Daniel's leadership and Tammy's leadership. I think that's how you guys have led as a team. But you guys have had some incredible success in your givers being extremely generous to accelerate vision. I'd love to, even if there's any stories that you may have, but how did you create an environment of trust and really of generosity? Because your people have been extremely faithful and continue to be.
Yeah, in fact, I think it's really part of the DNA of Lifepoint. It really is part of our culture, but it comes from the heart of our senior pastors. I mean, when you think about generosity, like if you were to ask me to describe generosity, I would talk about Daniel Floyd. I'm not even going to go into all his stories because those are his stories to tell, but there's a number of times where, they personally sacrificed, not because they're trying to build a great church, because they are trying to reach people. They are fully 100% committed to the mission. To them, it's never even been a question. Like they don't go, oh my gosh, how are we going to make ends meet? They know that God is going to make ends meet because they've been called to this mission. They are two of the most incredibly generous people that I know, and it's gotten into our DNA. And because the generosity, the heart that is displayed by them, it's built in an incredible amount of trust in, the whole church, but specifically our kingdom builders. Every time, I talk to a kingdom builder after, an event with Floyd's, somebody will come up and say, I just love how authentic, how genuine they are. That just comes through in everything that they do. And they are. We've had a number of pastors come here and speak, and every single one of them says the same thing. They are the same in private as they are in public. What you get is the real deal. And I think that's the first component to it. But you also have to fight for it. Like culture is what you do or what you allow. You have to fight for generosity to be front and foremost, because I believe it is a biblical principle. It is a blessing on the house if you keep generosity first and foremost. And it speaks to the heart of why it is that we're doing what we're doing. We're not coming together on a Sunday morning just to hear a great word and to worship together. We're coming together on a Sunday morning because we have a mission that was given to every single believer on the face of the planet to go out and make other disciples, to go and reach the lost. And it's that important. So I would say those are the two key things. It's in their DNA, and we have had to fight for it in our culture. We fight to keep it there.
How have you seen because you're fairly hands-on with the business leaders, and so many people are reluctant to talk about generosity, but this microphone doesn't happen unless a business person got involved in paying for it. Your church
Yeah.
buildings, the college, the missions, any of these, they just don't happen. So it truly is a divine covenant partnership that God has had since the beginning of time, actually. But how have you seen business leaders in your church really connect, find success in their purpose as a kingdom builder?
We have tremendous, we have such a generous church. I couldn't speak enough about the people that have, over the last 17 years, helped build the church. I'm standing on the shoulders of people that came before me, people that were generous. Like, they weren't even, business leaders. It was, the mom who is committed to giving over and above the tithe, and she has a generous heart. She has the gift of generosity, who's giving, $15 a week. All of that has helped to build that kind of culture there. But in particular, in the last, 4 or 5 years, it's taken off because and I love what you're doing for the global church and getting the concept of kingdom builders out there, because it's like the only spiritual gift that's weird to talk about in church. Why is it weird? Well, a lot of pastors, in my opinion, are weird about it because, it seems self-serving to them. Hey, I get my salary from the tithes and offerings, so I don't want to go out and, I don't want it to appear like I'm asking for money. But here's the problem with that. That's not why we tithe, and it's not why we give an offering. And it's actually not for, to keep the lights on. I know people have talked about that, the operations of a church, even like you were talking about the mic, because God doesn't need anything from us. He wants something for us. And once a business leader attaches their heart to that, once they connect with that, the idea that there is more they could be doing with their money that will ever be done in a nonprofit or some sort of, outside entity, entrepreneurial effort than inside the house of God. It has a huge impact on what you can and can't do, and the speed at which the vision grows. So we have a lot of key leaders. Like, for example, we do these lunches, and we kind of took a bit of a break, and we're getting back to these lunches where very intimate setting. We don't ask anything of them. We don't ask for any money. We just want to put vision in front of them. We want to just allow their heart to connect with what it is that their investment has done. And I remember one time we were having a lunch back with the Floyds, and we decided to go on a tour of the college space. And the college was growing really fast then, and we had just gotten a pretty small space, but it was sufficient for our needs. But we knew that we had to grow into another space. And as we're taking a tour, one of the kingdom builders asked me, he said, "Hey, based off the numbers, the projected numbers you just put out, you guys are going to be out of space." I said, "In fact, next year we'll be out of space." He said, "Well, what do we need to do? Like, what would it take to get the space next door?" And I told him what the cost was. I said, "I'll get you an exact figure, but it's around this." And that day he wrote a check and said, "I want to make sure that, we continue. What we're doing with these students is so important. I want to make sure we continue to invest in that." Another one, actually, this year, he said that, we had some stories about college students and the impact they're having globally right now. Some of them, going into missions, other churches, even going into the business world and applying their ministry, their leadership there. He said God just spoke to him in the service and said, I don't want a single college student to be turned away due to financial need. So he's committed to funding this scholarship that allows us to turn no student away because of financial need. It's things like that when they attach their heart to it, really when they attach their heart to what God is calling them to. And all we are is a vehicle for that. We're just a vehicle for showing them what it is that God's doing with the money. They do so many great things.
So good, because you guys have set the table for all of these things to happen, and but you've also stewarded it all very well. I love how your intentionality and how y'all communicate to your givers. I know y'all get together, you have gatherings, but you also have those intimate moments with lunches with a handful of people, or the larger gatherings of your whole team, and just seeing the fruit of that. But it's you're casting vision, but you're also communicating how we're winning, and the wins justify more new vision getting done. And what I see a lot of times are pastors will communicate all this vision, but they forget about, because they're in it every day. It's not, I don't even think it's intentional. They forget about how to communicate those wins. So it would look something like this. How are we winning at our first campus? Let's tell those stories of people impact and life change, because then that justifies a second campus getting funded. don't talk about
Yeah.
a second campus unless we're winning at the first campus. And you guys have been super intentional. One, Pastor Daniel is very comfortable in leading from a place of vision, making sure that the team is healthy, stewardship, and consistently putting it out there in front of people, and showing them how that return on investment. And I think God's hardwired kingdom builders. They're hardwired with generosity. They're going to give it somewhere. Not everywhere is going to make an eternal return on investment, though. And I think as the body of Christ, as the church, we're best positioned to do that, because we'll deal with feeding the poor and doing things that are noble and that are almost humanitarian, but we're not going to stop there. We're not going to withhold the greatest gift of all, which is salvation through Jesus and the discipleship aspect. And you guys have done a phenomenal job. What would you do as we're coming to a close? This has been very rich. How would you encourage or give advice to some pastors, maybe some executive pastors and even business people, but how would you give advice to some pastors who maybe either haven't started a Kingdom Builders or a legacy team, or they've tried it hadn't worked, or they're struggling they don't want to come across in a way, well, I don't want people to think I'm after their money. And how would you give some advice to some of those others that maybe are either trying to do a Kingdom Builder team or have never don't know even where to start?
What I would say first, from a practical perspective, and then I want to get into the spiritual. From a practical perspective, if you're not actively considering it or working on it, you're doing yourself and your community a disservice. Like you really are. Because here's the thing, that we don't want anything from any of our Kingdom Builders. We want something for them. There are biblical principles that apply to every single one of these. There is blessing that comes. Now, we're not a prosperity gospel or anything like that. It's just a fact. Like it is in the Old Testament, continues in the New Testament. There is blessing that comes. But here's the thing: if God doesn't use you, He's going to use somebody else. So you want to be the one that's on the other side of that blessing. You don't want to be the one that passes up the blessing because you're too afraid to have a conversation with a Kingdom Builder and not ask them for money. Put in front of them what it is that God, what God has given you vision for. And I would dare even say this, that if you are uncomfortable putting God's vision for your community in front of people, it's probably not the right assignment for you.
Yeah. Wow.
Because God has called all of us to something, and that is all the same thing. We are all under the same mission, which is to go out and make disciples. It's to reach the lost. And that Kingdom Builder could be the difference in somebody getting the Bible in their language in a particular part of the country, or a food line being built in your community that's feeding the hungry. If it's not going to be you, that blessing will move somewhere else.
That's really, really good. And that's a perfect segue into my last point, because I always conclude each podcast with encouraging people to ask themselves this question. And I think it's one of the most powerful questions that you can ever ask. And I think we need to repeat it. We need to repeatedly ask ourselves this question: is what do we want our legacy to be?
Yeah.
You're going to have a legacy. The type of legacy is up to you. You choose the legacy you leave. And I think so many people sometimes settle, they get sidetracked, they get fearful, and they just kind of or pass the baton too early. And so, if you're alive, you have breath in your lungs. God's not done yet. And I think so many times we prematurely settle or allow fear to come in, rather than just speaking God's truth and giving people, setting a table. This is how I say Kingdom Builders is not about money. Kingdom Builders is about helping people fulfill what God's created them to do. It's no different than a worship team. But I think our perspective of how we monitor success and classify it. If I invest $10 million in a church to get a building, I'm one person that invests $10 million and I get a building paid for. That's amazing. But you know what? That's a small return. if I just look at it just in that aspect. But when then I put the life change that perpetually happens inside that building that goes out into local, national, and global missions and outreach, that reaches thousands of people, that changes trajectories of generations of families, then that's a logarithmic increase of impact. Because it's never really about us as much as it is about fulfilling what God's created us to do. And I think when we have a mindset of looking at things with this factor of when we give away what we've learned and what we've lived, God puts a logarithmic increase to it. So, and I think we won't see that full return till we get to heaven. And that, as you said earlier in the podcast, that e-ROI, it's going to be incredible. We're going to have people and lives changed and families changed because we just simply got in the lane God's called us to run in, and we ran our race and fulfilled all that He's called us to do. And then we hear those great words, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." But I think it's going to be a huge party. And, God talks about rewards in heaven, and it's going to be like an Olympic competition. Some people get gold, some silver, some bronze, some just happy to be in the room, And so, but I think if we could see it, and I'll end with this. I think if we could see it as though we're investing in Apple in 1976 when it started. Yeah. If we knew the outcome of the company today, would we invest in Apple all those years ago? Of course we would, because we know the outcome. We know the outcome. God's given us this promise. We know the outcome. So it's shouldn't be surprising. And so it's simply understanding and investing in today what's going to outlive me. And I think that's real legacy when we do it in Jesus' name. My brother,
amen.
Thank you so much. You've been a blessing. You guys are doing great things. If you're ever in the Virginia area, check out Lifepoint Church. If any of our viewers ever wanted to connect or get any resources from Pastor Daniel, or what's the best way to go about that?
They can either email the info ad account, so they can go to Lifepoint's website, lifepoint.org, or they can email my wife, Kramer @lifepoint.org, and we can get them any of those resources.
No, that's great. And also, too, I would check out Pastor Daniel has a podcast that is just really incredible. Yeah, how can our viewers get access to that?
We have that linked on the website, and then he also has his own website. So all of those are linked to lifepoint.org. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, brother. And thank you for your openness and all you shared. Again, thank you for the incredible service to our country and what you're doing. I truly believe this episode is going to help tons of people, tons of leaders, how to raise up teams, how to have a tough mental mindset to fulfill what God has called you to do, to be seasoned and prepared, as well as, engaging in the battle, in the mission that God has for us. And so you can also check out any of our previous episodes at the Legacy Starts Today podcast. You can go to kingdombuilders.us, find all of the resources, as well as get in touch with us if we can help you in any way. We're found on Instagram as well and through your social media platforms. It's just a joy and a privilege to get to do what we do. If you're a business leader that want to dig in more of how you can make an impact in and through your church and in your family, reach out to us as well. If you're a pastor where we can help you, we actually do a virtual now intensive of kingdom builders and building legacy teams that actually is helping thousands of churches around the world and making an impact when you bring pastors and business people, not to compete against one another, but to complete each other. We see the church advanced in great ways in Jesus' name. Thank you again so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. God bless.
To learn more, follow us on social media at kingdombuilders.us. And join us next time for Legacy Starts Today with Lee Domingue.